The sun has all but gone down behind the western hills, and the highest grandmother oaks on the eastern horizon have their crowns lit, brilliant, warm and stern in the last of light's departure. I write this by the window, to the sound of drum and fiddle, and of 4 feet stepping out in rhythm on the flagstones. The dancers whirl and slip back and forth past each other, now mirroring, then breaking form, linking arms to throw themselves left and right, flowing between partners, ranks forming and dissolving, always shying away at some point of seemingly inevitable collision. Pairs leaving to weave around those now engage the dance that they have just left. The movements overlapping, shapes collapsing, up and down, through and past. Shouting and clapping and lunging, pleasure and solemnity and bestial abandon, counterbalanced. They often come afoot from calamity, and yet so precise are these steps that all move as one, as shoals of fish, as flocks of birds. The band plays Abstol, music with fierce and weighty driving rhythms beaten out on goatskin, and with the keening overtones of strings and long horns calling atop the din. The dancing began just before sundown, and it will likely not end until first light. These movements have been honed for generations, and they hold in their steps the same stories that I would wish to record here in these missives. This dance, though, it cannot be captured truly by such mutable things as words, and I do fear that mine will fare the same in their pursuit of the memories of the old days held here. This revel is not an atmosphere congruent with being sat down and interviewed. Now, a riverboat named the Hascalia has docked in town, bound south for the city of Yalbpo, and the gathering that marks the departure of some of the youth of the town aboard it is fraught and exuberant. To some in Sokvaapit, the leaving of their younger members is a contentious issue. Now, I'll record here if anything more tonight becomes of interest. A tall, sharp-faced papermaker, with tattoos of willow boughs reaching down their own arms, beckoned me into the throng, and as I shook my head, I saw that they saw my own tattoo below the ear, marking me as a migratory, and their hair fell and hid their expression, and they slipped back into the heaving mass. The high doors of the Ubliaska are propped wide open, as early spring means a clear run of nights now and then. The front yard affords a view down onto the roofs of moon-bathed Sokvaapit, and the cascade is cut clear above in a perfect bisecting line of pale against the deepest blue. We are all a bit sky drunk. It has been an eventful few days since my last missive. I managed to gain access to the physician's hall, where I met the youths who left town, the ones that Egron Lewatum told me of on my last visit to the mast house. They tried to walk to Ruerdskyeg on the forest road, and this is what became of them. Now, the group had gone nearly a week before our expedition entered Sokvaapit. They comprised a carpenter, a weaver, a baker, a scribe, and 2 farm labourers. Now, only a pair of them survived from this initial 6, being one of the labourers and the baker. They returned from the Ruerdskyeg the morning before we arrived in town. I had to smarm my way past the physician's secretary with some half-spun yarn of my therapeutic skills and healing sagas learned in a Slenish military hospital. A shabby lie, and disrespectful to the great skill and care that I saw the medicine performed by those mantis-masked doctor-priests bent low around the mutilated. It did get me into the ward, though. Teherg and Dalek and Wiptir Mvoxi are their names, and they are not much younger than myself. When I heard the rumours and inquired after them down the distributory square, I was told by a town council rep that these 6 were the first to have attempted to walk the forest road to Ruerdskyeg since their communications ceased and that great city's mast fell silent 40 years ago. I don't know if I believe this, but perhaps now we might see that it could be the case. The phrase I have heard a great deal of in Sokvaapit, that no one goes to the half-city on the falls. This may be something that is held in theory rather than practice. I found the pair as the only incumbents of the dark ward. The place stood wide, with trunks of stone disappearing upwards, hung with drapes and feathered charms, and lined with cluttered shelves of glass bottles and jars, tins and flasks, rolls of glinting instruments stacked so you would squint and see veins of ore in a rock face. Evenly spaced 4-poster beds, draped loose and ragged. The air is cool and still. From the crossbeams ribbing the ceiling hang thick sheafs of dried herbs, and the sides are spread with papers and books, poultices, pestle and mortar, wide cluttered tables dimly lit by the glow of the ever-present scrim, smouldering away in brass dishes in the rough-hewn alcoves. I made my way by the lamp given to me by the hunched old secretary in the entrance hall, who seemed to promptly fall asleep again the moment it was clear that I had no further business with him. Built a long time before the war, Sokvaapit's healing house is one of its oldest buildings, half cavern, half construct, with passageways sledding off into the dark in many directions. I know that it will be connected to other cliff dwellings by unseen corridors from when such cutting was much faster. That craft, lost up here on the shelf, the one that is now restricted to be the sole work of the forecastocracy. Though an unofficial title, the work of the Dirt Office, as the unified constructive branch is commonly known, is even talked of up here. The main chamber, though, is far, far older. On the back wall is a carved relief of some great height in the same flowing organic style that is the tradition of much of the old country. The vast carving shows a lay from the Book of Knowings, where Hag taught us to care for our sick and wounded after the first great beast came ravaging out of the furthest north to feed upon the newborn race of humanity. When I first entered, the lamplight caught the lifetime's worth of minutely detailed work, hammer and chisel, showing all the people of the world in blossoming rings around the tall cross-legged form of our great parents, with deeper, taller lines showing the first pillars arrayed close about the legs of God. And as I set my lamp upon the floor, the flicker brought it all up dancing. A gasp was drawn from me and stifled, and then I stood silent, gazing. The body of the beast lay at the highest point, a coiled serpent with 10 arms and a head that bore no face. The shade of the old days. I forgot the two patients, and it was only Wiptir's questioning voice that brought me back into the room. I raised my lamp from where I placed it on the floor, and the scene shrank away from the orange glow as I went and stood by the bed. He asked me my name and what I wanted, and I told him that it was the business of the Slenish expedition to Ruerdskyeg and the orders of Inchimu Hoik that had me disturbing him, and that I needed to know what it was in the woods that had fallen upon him and his friends. I told him of what the town council reps said about how no others had left for the old capital by the forest road, and that this he swore, and said that they were liars, and that though the signal from Ruerdskyeg has been dark for nearly half a century, once or twice every decade, a party of 6 of the newly of age would still depart under a great commotion. That though the practice has been ceased for all their adult life, the council forbade them to speak of it at any point to any who came from outside the town. I then told Wiptir of my own lie, the one that granted me audience with him, and he laughed at this, and he agreed to play along. Wiptir was the only one who spoke. Their friend, Teherg, is in an induced slumber. His right forearm is missing, just above the elbow. The remains had to be amputated on his return. He was brought home slung across his companion's shoulders, beheld by the watchman half dozing at his post, who jerked awake at the strange silhouette making a staggered way across the bridge in the spray-hung half-light of grey morning. Apparently, they were almost taken for a shade and shot. Teherg was sent down into the shifting peace to ease the pain of his recovery. Maybe Igran Luetim, or one of her junior cloud tellers, is cradling his wandering mind right now. Wiptir, though, they seem stable enough and possessed of a strong character. Exhaustion is their worst affliction, along with the deep puncture between the ribs where they tripped and with Turg's weight to speed their fall came down upon an upturned branch. There is something lodged without form behind his eyes. The younger of the pair, though you couldn't tell it by the mounded scaffold of his frame. When I heard that he had carried the baker back to town with almost no food or rest, I did not believe it. But seeing him now, it makes sense. In the dark of the ward, the ragged rasp of their companion's breath set a rhythm to our words. Though Wipter is alive, his cognition seems impaired by their ordeal, and it was a rough process getting what I needed from them. I didn't have long in the end. These questions were all that I could manage, and I have transcribed them verbatim as best as I could. Why did you leave? None of us wanted to stay here. We wanted to see it, the far side of the forest, walk the meadows of the great valley, verdant and well-peopled, where the waters of the Hascalia pass wide to tumble off the shelf, off the edge of the world. To see Ruerdskyeg, with its great walls and domes and towers, lit by a true unclouded sun rising out of the sea. Jansch, he wanted to go beyond the city, to the mountains, the Valgrads, the teeth of God. Even though Wipter's struggling breath made it hard to pick out, I could feel the reverence in their voice when they spoke of the work of their progenitors and of those heights where the grey scribes are said to reside in communion with the heavens. I don't expect you to leave that part in. What made you decide to go? We all had the idea in our heads for years, spoke of it often, always said one day. Jansch was the one who finally pushed us to actually do it, though. After they went to the mast house to ask of news of their sister and her wife, who went down aboard a riverboat to Yalppo. I don't know what the Lowayton woman told him, but when he came back, he was different. They seemed rattled and emboldened no end. Said that they could not stay here to forget our history, the history of the old country, of the true Shelflands, and that neither would he sell himself down the river to the forecastocracy. No one had left for Ruerdskyeg in over 10 years, but Jansch, they believed we could do it. None of us could abide staying in Sokvaapit. Though many are here and dear to us, this place fades year on year. Where did the attack happen? It was in the parent wood. The road was just a path by that point, and the trees stand so wide and go so far up. You can't see the crowns for the cloud about them. Their trunks are vast enough to eat the light about you, even at midday. And it was night when it happened. How many of them were there? No idea. We didn't see them coming until they were on us. The one I saw, though, it was tall. It lifted Gracie upwards into the dark so fast, then dropped her. I don't know if it was the fall that killed her, or if she was gone before she hit the ground. I didn't see what happened to Jansch or the others. There was screaming and snapping, and me and Teherg, we just ran. I thought we got away, and then I could feel he'd stopped running. I turned around and saw his feet, his heels, in front of my face. hanging. I grabbed him by the legs and pulled backwards as hard as I could. Then Hascalia cried out and went quiet. And with all my strength, I picked him up and just ran. Did you see what it was? Was it the shade? No, not that. No, we would have felt it. We would have heard it in our ears and in our bones. Are you listening to me? We have all spent enough time playing in the woods as a child to know to run hard before you ever even see a weeper. At this I felt bad. Sorry, of course. So then, it was the most hated? I don't know. No one knows what they look like, really. It was too faint to see properly. It wasn't like how we get told they are from the stories. No robes, no spears, no whining flutes. All I got was an outline in the moonlight. But what? It was shaped like Ruerdskyeg. Like God. I realized he looked not at me, but past me, into the dark, to where he knew the great carving spread unseen. I was about to ask what he meant by this, but at that moment I heard steps in the entrance hall, and hushed voices, and then the door was flung open, and Glabvyokta, the presiding physician, came in and bustled me out hurriedly, with a hand gently but firmly clamped around my wrist, murmuring at me of their patient's need for rest and solitude. And, well, that my southern songs of respite were appreciated, that perhaps their potency was misjudged. It was made clear to me in no uncertain terms that I was not to return until their patients were deemed healthy. Behind their spruce-carved ibex mask, I could see the scrutiny and the fear in their eyes. I politely bid them good night, and had the heavy oak door of the physician's hall closed in my face, and so found myself again in the old street under the cliff in the early evening, at lamplighting hour, and was greeted by the stilted lamplighters clacking up the worn paved streets, bearing their fire from sconce to sconce, like bright thread pulling loosely through the fabric of the young blue night. I went back to the main street and joined the converging processions heading up the hill to the Ubiaska.